do we make it more contextual? How do we bring it down to our sort of our level in the whole conversation of, for example, in Africa, the Africa we want, building knowledge and co-creating it, in the sense that we are the people in the middle of developing homegrown solutions in terms of science, technology, innovation, and even in policy. And it's from this context and the need to move forward, and part of what is happening with the Africa Research and Impact Network is to start having these conversations that actually lead us into that space of decolonizing the way people think, the way people do research, how researchers are basically are molded from different formal and informal settings. In these spaces where now we started thinking, well, how does decolonizing methods look like for Africa and for the global South? Decolonizing methods in different contexts, we sort of started realizing that it gives space, it gives room for people to start opening up and broadening out how people think, how people react, how people carry out research, how they engage. And it's in this is a space for free thinking that decoloniality actually brings on the table. It also almost like gives us room for even people who are in scholarships, people who are in academia, people who are in practice, to move towards scholarly activism. How do you use information being generated towards pushing a particular agenda that will transform how people think? It gives room for us to critique, for people to think about how our contextually relevant research is actually able to change policy and power processes and challenge what is seen as dominant culture in different perspectives. So when we started exploring this topic early in the year, there are certain things that emerged. And one of those areas was about valuing diversity. We had collectively issues around challenging power through methods. How do we challenge power through methods? How does our philosophical background and our philosophical underpinnings, how do they relate to how methods are actually evolving and how we can apply them? And of course, the multidimensionality of it, of which is the core of our discussion today. And one other perspective was about how do we customize, transfer, use the different research methods that we are building towards. Over the year, we have had conversations about valuing diversity. So basically bringing in space for people to have the free thinking, opening up spaces for people to start looking at our sort of global South centric research that is literally trying to solve challenges that are seen within our own context. So we had this conversation about valuing diversity, and some material about this is already available and can be accessed. We also have had the conversation about power and methods. So basically, how do we challenge what is considered as dominant, what has been there, and how do we use research to do this? How do we position ourselves to counter these aspects which could be considered incumbent, what has been there, and how do we challenge that narrative moving forward? Then we went ahead and had a discussion. We're planning to have a discussion about how to co-develop, co-design specific research ideas within our own context. And this is a conversation we're going to be having in August. So our next convening is about articulation of methods, how we're able to customize, use context specific, open up the space for sort of pluralism, more goal-oriented and interactive methods that can be resourceful towards pushing the agenda of decolonizing methodologies forward. A few weeks ago, we had this conversation as part of the Transformations Conference 2021, where we had talked about the philosophical underpinnings and how that looks like when you start thinking about methods. This basically is like there are deep-rooted aspects of methods that need to be considered before we start even thinking of, okay, now this is how we break it and this is how we move towards methodologies and methods that can be used. Today's conversation basically centers on this other tenet of our decolonizing methods bit, and is about multidimensionality. It's about how do we consider the different layers of methods or considerations that can be important for us to sort of break out from the colonized aspect of it. we recognize international dominance in a lot of the method. And most of it is from the north, and therefore it imposes ideas to the south sometimes. We also cognizant that different disciplines, for example, the arts, the sciences, and all the others, also have some deep-rooted ways of doing things. And we also consider that we have perspectives like associated roles, like gender-related roles, whether you are a man or a woman, or whether you're a senior or a junior, and all these things together really speak to the multiple layers of actions that are needed for us to really move towards decolonizing methods. And in this multiplicity of layers is where we think about that for us to decolonize research methods, we need to basically offer more space for people to be able to participate, for people to act, for people to innovate around how research looks like. Conversation today is going to go slightly deeper into this perspective. We're going to listen to a few panelists and also have sort of an open conversation about these aspects of multiplicity of layers of actions and participation, and whether we can sort of move from having a passive laid back position to a more dominant position when it comes to these research perspectives. And when you start thinking about this multiplicity of dimensions, the first thing that actually has come into our discussions many times is funding. How do you decolonize when a lot of the money comes from a certain setting, which is likely to impose on the decisions that the kind of research, the kind of methods you can actually implement? The other perspective is, how do you break away from this research power dynamics that are inherent in different settings, whether it's from the north-south or the elitist kind of thinking that emerges when you start thinking about sustainability methods. The other perspective is some sense of almost pseudo multidisciplinarity. Some studies, some research, some scientists come with this is a multidisciplinary kind of research, or interdisciplinary, or the thing that brings collective action. But then it ends up being more like it's false multidisciplinarity in some sense. And it's because of that that then we are thinking, okay, what about the gender lens in this? How does gender in many ways come into the dimensions of research methods? And of course, not forgetting the politics around research. Just in my own sort of reflective thought of this is that when you start thinking about research funding, you immediately start thinking that the people who are dominating the funding are likely to be the ones who set the agenda. So funding flows are largely affected by, a funder giving mind to the funded, which in some sense becomes a dimension that is very difficult to break. And I hope that from the discussions today, we'll also highlight that kind of thinking, that funding flows as a dimension of decolonizing methods is something to consider. When you think about research power dynamics, of course, we have people who make decisions in research. This could be basically people who are at the top of the research ladder. And it brings up the sort of an elitist view. They prioritize the agenda, they decide what happens without sometimes thinking about the realities of the people who are impacted. So power transfer from this sort of people in the decision-making space, and giving some of that power to the people who are researched, or the the researchees in some context, the people who are actually impacted by some of the knowledge or solutions that are provided. That power transfer can, is a dimension that you have to start thinking about when you're thinking about decolonizing sustainability research methods. We talked about this pseudo sort of multidisciplinarity. So often it's packaged as this, when you're thinking about application capacity, it's packaged as this thing that is going to go beyond disciplines. But sometimes the question is, are they really that much? And are they able to fundamentally change how we think about methods? And are they able to actually lead to our solutions in that multiplicity of ways? Now, we can't go without talking about the aspect of male-female researchers and how some disciplines have this imbalance, or rather balance in its own selves. So gender reflective focus is something we need to think about, whether in terms of decolonizing methods and as a dimension of that space, we can think about gender as a fundamental dimension that requires decolonizing for us to really move towards decolonizing of research methods. The research politics are broad. I mean, we almost have like these people who are first level researchers and people who are, could be considered second fiddle. And it's in that consideration that people lose agency. Their capacity to act becomes diminished when you start thinking about the research politics. And it goes a long way to talk about, the kind of collaborations we have and whether they really cultivate some type of agency or they're just reinforcing the same colonial systems that we are trying to focus on. So broadly looking at these areas of dimensions, I mean, there could be many other dimensions to talk about, but looking at these dimensions, then there's another factor that we need to start thinking about, the context under which research happens. So when you think about localized context or international context, or the scale of the kind of impact that you're thinking about, whether it's a sort of small scale kind of impact area or a grand scale kind of impact area. And what we've seen is that as you come from, small scale impact areas to small scale localized impact areas, and you go towards sort of bigger scale impact areas with international participation in terms of research, an interesting thing happens. The intensity of these dimensions colliding with each other and making it very difficult to decolonize increases. So there's low intensities, for example, when you're thinking about the dimensionality, when it is a small localized kind of research. But then when you're thinking about sort of big time research carried out at global levels with big geopolitical systems and considerations, then you very quickly start thinking that, well, it's even difficult to decolonize those dimensions, because those dimensions become very complex. The dimensions, including gender considerations, all that become really, really difficult to break. And this is from a perspective of some of the conversations we've had and some of the ideas that have been generated as we talk about decoloniality of methods, and thinking about these different dimensions and how to really break those different dimensions so that we can talk about decolonizing methods. And is this thinking that then we sort of started asking ourselves, what does this mean to other people? And we have a poll. If you have a moment, just go to menti.com and share your opinion. What does multidimensionality of these research methods towards sustainability, what do they mean to you as a practitioner, as a researcher? So if you go to menti.com and you use the code 39905928, you can share your opinion about this, and we can review those opinions in a moment. In the meantime, if there are any queries or questions that we can be raised, then we can discuss that as we wait for results from your own perspectives of multidimensionality of research methods. Any questions? Seems like there's no questions at the moment. So I'll then hand the program over to Dr. Asnath Maobe to take it from here. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you, Joe, for the wonderful setting of the agenda for today. And I guess I have a question for you. And I just wondered, because in your presentation, you said that, when we talk about small scale impact research, then it seems like things are not as complicated. But then when you open up to allow maybe moving your research maybe to international impact areas, then issues come on board with multidimensionality of methods. And so then I just wondered, is it that multidimensionality in that case could be a problem, or it's a challenge? Or, I mean, you made it look like it's a bad thing. Is that so?
I wouldn't say it's a bad or good. It's just that as you open up the space for, you know, if the geopolitical sort of boundary is bigger and there are more participation from, you know, international perspective, then there is sort of more potential for people to sort of interact more intensely. And it's in that intense interaction that you end up having the tenets of multidimensionality become very strong. You know, we start having conflict almost, you know, when it comes to funding, who's playing what role. But when the geopolitical space is smaller, and when the context is localized, then the owners of the information, the people who are participating, they are more likely to work together better. And therefore, whereas the multidimensionality context will still be visible, the intensity might be relatively lower. So the intensity, you know, grows with context complexities, but also with the geopolitical coverage of some of the research ideas that would come up.
Nice. Well, thanks, Joe. Well, I guess now that could help us just move into get to hear from our panel discussants on some of the experiences from practice and some of them from research. And I guess, Joe, if you allow me, then I can be able to share my screen. Okay. Okay. Okay, so actually with us we have Vivian Kazi. Vivian Kazi is the head of Economic and Social Research Foundation, ESRF, and she heads the commission in Tanzania, and she is a senior researcher at ESRF, and she actually has 15 years experience in research, policy, reviews that cuts across trade, agri, tourism, energy, environment, and she's also done many studies around impact evaluations and surveys. And of course, she holds an MBA in finance from the University of Dar es Salaam and PhD in analysis from Netherlands. And Vivian is currently a PhD candidate in international trade at University of Dar es Salaam, and we are happy to have you, Vivian, here. You're most welcome. And our next speaker is actually Dr. Felix Lombe, who is the CEO for African Institute of Corporate Citizenship, AICC. And Dr. Lombe is in development finance and has got experience in training and practice, 17 years experience right there. And he's the CEO for AICC, an NGO that is based in Malawi, that is responsible for brokering multi-sector partnerships, socio-economic sectors in Malawi. He's got a PhD in development studies and MPhil development economics from University of Western Cape. And Dr. Lombe also has a BA public administration from University of Malawi, and he's a chartered development finance analyst. So we truly welcome you, Dr. Lombe, to this session and happy to have you. And then we also have Shenhaz Munish. She's a project manager, and she is a health systems and policy researcher, an occupational therapist, an emerging voice, and Senior Atlantic Fellow for Health Equity at Tekano. Munish is currently the project manager for Sheham Family and WIT program on social determinants of health and Health Equity, School of Public Health, University of Witwatersrand, and is the co-founder for Africa Health Futures. And she also serves on the steering committee of the People's Health Movement. You're most welcome, Munish, to this session and happy to have you. Then we have Dr. Melissa Wangoi Mwita. Mwita comes to us from Technical University of Kenya. She's a lecturer there. And she's also a fellow at Africa Research and Impact Network and a lecturer in the Department of Spatial Planning and Design at TUK, that is Technical University of Kenya. She's a postdoctoral fellow previously at the University of Geneva, Switzerland. She also has her MSc and PhD in Policy and Planning from the University of Tsukuba, Japan, and her research interests include urban planning, policy, and she's also into political topographies as well as branding and privatization of naming rights. Then finally, we have, welcome Melissa. We also have Diana Ngui, who's got 14 years of experience and expertise in economic and policy research. She's got a PhD in economics from Martin Luther University in Germany, and she has also a master's in arts economics from Kenyatta University in Kenya. She has also done some research with Africa Economic Research Consortium and also at the United Nations University that WIDA in Helsinki, Finland. And her main research is in industry economics, policies, and enterprise performance. So we're so glad to have all these speakers with us here today. And then, of course, my name is Asenath Maobe. I'm also a research fellow at Africa Research and Impact Network, and I'm happy to moderate this session. And to start with, I'm going to ask to just have some few perspectives. We could start with Vivian Kazi. Vivian, we could, well, I know Dr. Joel has actually set up the agenda for this session on multidimensionality of methods, and we look forward to just have 5 to 6 minutes talk presentation, and you could present around, I mean, what are your perspectives about multidimensionality in sustainability research? What does that mean, especially to your work? And if you have any cases that you could share with us, and then of course, how you think multidimensionality could actually contribute to decolonizing research methods in the global south. Vivian Kazi, welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Asenath, and let me introduce myself. As part of the introduction, my name is Vivian Kazi. I'm heading the Commissioned Research Department at the Economic and Social Research Foundation. Just a point of correction, because I was introduced as a head of ESRF. We have a head of ESRF, Dr. Kausikida, but I'm heading one of the program departments. It's called the Commissioned Research Department. And thank you for the invitation as one of the panelists for providing some insights on the multiple facets of research methods, specifically from social science perspectives. And on brief, ESRF, for some people who do not know, ESRF is a research institution that has been in Tanzania since 1993. And the main scope of work for ESRF is to undertake research, socio-economic research, as well as capacity development for policy actors in various disciplines, various sectors, and specifically on issues of policy formulation, reviews, and analysis, as well as other socio-economic issues like budgeting issues and some other monitoring and evaluation trainings, and etc. So ESRF, it is different program departments, and my department is Commissioned Research Departments, and we also have some other 3 program departments, including a department that is concerned with capacity development. Specifically going to the subject matter on multiple facets of research methods. For ESRF, I'll share what we've been doing. That is a traditional way that we've been doing in the past, and how we've adopted to some other new perspectives of research methods. We've been doing various socio-economic research using various methods of research, including the field trials, the randomized control trials, that is called the experimental design. But we've been also using the modeling, doing the estimates of various variables to undertake socio-economic research. And we've been also using the normal sampling methods, as you know, probability and non-probability sampling methods to determine various issues in the socio-economic issues for the research, as well as we've been using the qualitative methods, that means specifically for roundtable meetings and key informant interviews, and more specifically for our scope of work when we do public policy review or public policy formulation, we normally adopt to the qualitative methods, because we normally get the formats of doing those public policy review or public policy formulation of policies, different public policies, using the qualitative kind of methods, participatory kind of methods on the same. And we've been also doing evaluation of various projects for various stakeholders of ESRF, but we've adopted to a new kind of evaluation methods. It's called the OECD DAC 5 criteria, that are mainly on issues of looking at the relevance of the project, the impact of the project, effectiveness of the project, efficiency of a project, as well as sustainability of a certain project. So we've adopted to that. But focusing on the subject matter, specifically after the pandemic in 2020, ESRF, just as any other research institutions, not only in Africa, maybe outside Africa, we've been faced with some problems of doing physical research, because traditionally we could go to a certain group of respondents outside Dar es Salaam and do physical meetings, consultations using different methods that I've also mentioned. But since last year, we've been forced to adopt some online kind of consultations. But that one also limits us to do some other research, specifically focusing on rural, meeting with the rural community. You cannot meet with the rural community using online platform, because most of the areas in the rural areas, they are not that much reachable. And if at all it is reachable, you cannot do like Survey Monkey, because the people from that side, they normally own the normal phones, not the smartphones that they can connect and you can do the research. So that is the challenge that we've been working on, how we can sort out. But for other research, like when we do some policy reviews, because it consists of meeting with various institutions, we've adopted using the online platform like the Zoom. And the good enough for the Zoom meetings, we can do some group meetings to have parallel sessions with different groups, and then convenient breakaway sessions can happen in those online meetings. But that one is for the institutions. We have also learned on how we can use the modern technology to really meet with various people, many people at the same time. But another challenge is accessibility to internet. Specifically outside our main city, Dar es Salaam, it has been a challenge, and we've been working on how we can be able to adapt to the situation. I agree with Joel. Some of the challenges in this multiple facets of research methods is issue of sustainability and funding. That one also applies to our research institution. We've been facing with those challenges of funding and sustainability of our research, sustainability of the institution. And because most of these research institutions depend on donor financing and others, few others are financed by the government, they have been facing some difficulties to get direct finance from the same. For Tanzania, for instance, I can say at least we have our research agenda that was developed back in 2010, and it has been changed over time. I mean, the research policy, and of recent, the Commission for Science and Technology has been able to develop national research agenda. So there's research institutions, when they look for funding, they focus on those research agenda that are also needed by the policymakers to undertake policy. So that is something that I can share with you, and thank you for listening.
Wow, okay. Thank you so much, Vivian, for those, refreshing remarks. And there's something you mentioned about how that just within the COVID period, still you are able to use modern technology to kind of meet various groups of people. I just wondered how you think about that in terms of, well, it is something that you also mentioned that, when we talk about internet connectivity, it is not everyone who is able to connect. How are you able to also go around this? Because I believe your research also covers these groups of people who are not able to access to the modern methods of, research. I mean, the ability to use survey monkeys, Zoom meetings, and such. Did you have like any way, or the invention of any kind of methods that could actually favor them still?
Yep. Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Asenat. We've been trying to liaise with people at the local level. For instance, if you want to meet with some beneficiaries of like social protection fund, is called the TASAF, that provides cash transfer to the people who cannot meet their daily needs. They are poor. So we've been able to meet with them, but through the field mobilizers, the people at the local level who are working with the government at the very local level, they can convene them, and through the office, then we can facilitate the field organizers, mobilizers, we can facilitate them with some package for the internet accessibility, and they can meet with us, but that one is online. And it has been difficult because once you have their head in the group, they cannot be as open as if you go there physically and you do some focus group interviews without their chairman of the village. That one has been a problem, and we, as I said, from the challenges, we've been working on how we can work on that perspective.
Wow, thank you very much. I guess that aspect of field mobilizers to take care of all those other groups brings on board the aspect of, multi-people, multi-dimensionality of methods on how you can reach them in their context. Thank you very much, Vivian. I guess now I'm going to call out on Dr. Lombe. Dr. Lombe, please talk to us.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Asenat. And my presentation, brief presentation, is not going to depart much from what my colleague Vivian also presented. I'm presenting from a social science perspective, but also from a field perspective. I guess I call myself a practitioner because I'm basically a ground person working largely in the agriculture sector, as the area introduced, but we are also in other sectors, health and partly in education. But I think whatever I'm going to present here is going to focus more on what as the AICC, we've been doing in the agriculture sector, especially on a certain, research which, was aimed at, fostering the adoption of modern farming technologies amongst the farmers. So we've wanted to see if we can test a certain model which, upon being, adopted, by the farmers, if we have high adoption levels, then we can use that, as a basis to also push for other, technologies that we wanted the farmer to adopt. Essentially, this, technology is called the micro investment. in short, MY technology, and it is in a way a small scale drip irrigation technology, which we wanted our farmers to adopt at the end of the day. And we were using an experimental, design, which involves, of course, their own participation as farmers, so that at the end of the day, we have got them also appreciating and giving their inputs. However, the model itself, or the technology itself, was a technology imported from Europe. We had thought that it would be easily, adopted by the local farmers because of some certain features. Essentially, it had the following features. We wanted them to increase their productivity. So the technology itself was able to ensure that farmers are able to harvest more on a single farming unit. But we also wanted to see if that technology would ensure continuous cash flow. Something which would enable them to, to harvest, for example, 3 times in a year. But at the same time, we wanted to find out if the technology was going to take care of, soil erosion. In our view, having looked at the technology itself, we felt that it was possible to get all these, areas, fulfilled, and we would excite, the participation of farmers on ground. For, a sample of 2,000 farmers that we worked with, we noted that although the design of the project itself had clear objectives, there were different expectations on the part of the farmers. And these expectations had an impact on their adoption, because on the part of farmers, they expected, the technology and the model itself to include issues of marketing, which were not included. And at the same time, we had thought that we would use another model where you have got a lead farmer in the project, but we noted that the lead farmer model itself was rather ineffective. Instead, we needed to make use of those that influence, public opinion on anything new in the field. And it is in that regard that after a year, we noted that the results were not that exciting. What we were able to record, this is what we expected, could not match until we had to take on board some of the expectations that I indicated to ensure that market was part of that. But at the same time, we needed also to make use of the public opinion makers at local level. And the second, the revised model, which we have done after now 2 years, has taken on board those 2 particular parameters. Of course, the other parameters, and I can confirm that the results in terms of the technology adoption now are exciting, because now we have got more farmers beyond the 2,000 farmers that we piloted the research with. Currently are in the process of having even in excess of 6,000 farmers. I felt I could share my experience from that particular hands-on experience in as far as the adoption of this particular technology is concerned, using an experimental research which had its own objectives based on a context in Europe. But then when we tried it on ground, we noted that there were other parameters which needed to be taken on board. And when we took them into perspective, then the objectives were met, at least in a way that we had earlier anticipated. I will stop there, and maybe as we go on, maybe try to clarify 1 or 2 aspects. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Lombe, for that experience. And I liked the aspect of where you actually gave us the exact experience that you've had with farmers on the ground and what the expectations were, which was quite different from some of the methods or designs that you are using for your project. And I also could just like to maybe just prompt you further, because I see your work involves, let's say, community involvement in terms of the farmers, and you mentioned that you use technology from Europe and sometimes expectations vary. So how have you been able to kind of marry the two, where you have technology that is more of Eurocentric, but then you are talking about farmers who are right in Malawi? How were you able to kind of design methods that could take care of their context and even the realities, but still achieve the same objectives?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a very exciting, but also, quite probing, question. Indeed, as the area indicated, the experience was that this technology was simple, and the only assumption that we had was that being a simple technology, or we assumed that on the ground, what prevents the adoption of the technology was the affordability and the simplicity. Like, if you have a technology that is expensive, farmers are not going to adopt. That was the hypothesis. If you have a technology that was complicated, then farmers are not going to adopt. And therefore, when we try to transplant this technology with that perspective on the ground, our experience was that these were not the only factors that were hindering farmers from adopting different technologies, and therefore we needed to mediate, the interest of the funders, but also the local reality. What we the way how we did it was to consider this as an open-ended learning, all right, as opposed to quickly venturing into an actual project. Because as Area indicated, the intention was to get this technology tested, and once tested, then it could be rolled out and get adopted by by a high number of farmers. We were going to land ourselves in trouble if we were to straight away start it as a project. We needed to, to do some learning, and this joint learning involved not only ourselves, but even the funders themselves. They were represented in our monitoring panel, or reference panel for M&E. Therefore, they appreciated the realities on the ground. If we had not included them in our reference panel, I think it was going to be very difficult. So I think, to answer your question, I would say we, apart from us as the champions, but also the farmers on ground as participants, we also had the representation of the funders in the M&E reference panel, which in a way, ensured mutual learning as and when the issues, were happening on ground. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, and thank you for that clarification and input, and we truly appreciate that. And so we can actually say one of the ways to contribute to decolonizing of research methods in the global south is to involve the locals, the people you are working with, so that they can also have their input and say what is best for them. Thank you so much. And so we're going to have our next speaker, who is Munish. Shehand Munish. Nice.
Okay.
Hi.
So it's Shanaz Munshi.
Yeah, it's a
Sorry, it's not the easy name to pronounce.
Yeah. Welcome.
So thank you so much. It's really fascinating to hear all these different stories from practitioners from across the continent who are really deeply engaging with power in such intentional ways. And I think taking quite seriously this idea that we need to disrupt coloniality in all of its forms. So my field of practice and work is the space of health, both as a healthcare worker, as I worked many years ago as an occupational therapist, and now as a health systems and policy researcher, but also as somebody that's trying to engage in a project on movement building, where we're trying to envision a future where we kind of dream into different ways of being and doing. And we call this collective the Africa Health Futures. And I'm really lucky that my colleague Lance is here with us on the call today, who is doing his PhD in trying to grapple with the responsiveness of the health system to queer users of the health system, and I think my research is located with looking at primary health care as a revolutionary ideal to try to bring to the fore people who are needing healthcare the most, to give them healthcare first. And another colleague, Kense, who's working in both the fields of mental health and systems change, and really trying to grapple with how do we bring about systems change that is deeply recognizing the impact of these historical forces of coloniality, of colonialism, and coloniality in the forms of heteropatriarchy, of racism, and of capitalism that are embedded and deeply structured in our systems today. So when I think of health in itself, I think that, we need our health. Every one of us has a state of health and well-being, and we need our good health to do anything in life. But at the same time, health is determined by so many structures and systems, whether it's if you've got food on your table, if you've got clean house, if you've got sanitation, if you've got education, if you've got a safe environment in which you live, if you've got governance that enable people to access healthcare services, have access to social services, have access to medication. So it's all about a supply chain management. So when thinking about research in health and health systems, it's quite a complicated system within which to engage. And every element of the system, from the global structure right down to the local structure, right down to how the people, whether you are queer, whether you are a sex worker, whether you are a woman, whether you are a pregnant teenager, whether you are a child, how you access and engage with that health system is very complicated and influenced highly by who you are and what your position is in society, and how you are given the human right and the dignity to exist. So when we look at research in the health system, we really need to, for us, the decolonial call is a very revolutionary one. It's about disrupting power wherever it exists. And part of that disruption of power means we need to look inwards at ourselves as researchers. So we've taken a stance that it's a conscientization project, a liberation project, but one that begins with who we are as researchers, and a deep recognition that the tools, the methodologies, the knowledge paradigms, the knowledge structures that we've been taught are highly complicit in the colonial project, because public health and anthropology and a lot of these fields of study began, their roots, their very foundation were inherent in colonial mindset in the period of colonization. So that thread stays with us today. And the way that healthcare workers, whether you're a doctor engaging with a patient, whether you're a health manager making decisions for the community, whether you're a health researcher making conclusions about about the people that you are doing research on, you hold a power that could be quite damaging if you are not conscious of how you conduct that research. And so reflexivity is really important so that we know how we use our power, how we relinquish our power sometimes, how we distribute power, how we straddle different forms of power, and what is the role of the researcher in doing research. And sometimes what we find in public health is people do research because research is a really good career path. And research becomes a means of getting a PhD and becoming a professor and being part of a university. But I think as part of Africa Health Futures, we've been very conscious that research is a tool for social justice. And it's also a tool that we see as part of disrupting coloniality in all its forms. And we see decoloniality as a political, epistemological, economic liberation project, and an ongoing project of conscientization, reclaiming, rebuilding, and moving away. So the way that we've been thinking about it, and I suppose our work is it's sort of being birthed currently. We had a convening last year where we grappled with what does decolonial theory offer us in the health system space. We've been grappling with the idea of making a paradigm shift from the very outset. And we've also been grappling with how do we then go about being and doing differently such that we dislodge coloniality of knowledge and power and being. So some examples, just to try and bring it home, so what do we actually mean? How does coloniality manifest in the health system? I think for us, especially when looking at mental health, or that the ways in which people who live in post-colonial countries, we are often othered. And this kind of marginalized reality, or this sense of being different or being in contrast to the white majority. And so there's a kind of othering and an erasure of ways of being and doing. And it's, for us, it's about disrupting that and reclaiming, allowing those that we work with to reclaim their dignity through the research process from the outset. And some of the methodologies that have shown to work is participatory action research, body mapping, sometimes photo voice, where the gaze is not the researcher's gaze, but rather the participant's gaze in conducting the research. And it's about also how does the research being analyzed, who's involved in the research and analysis, and how is the research being presented to the public? Who's the face in front of the knowledge? Who's the owner of the knowledge? Who's the authority of the knowledge? Who owns the knowledge that is produced? And these are some of the ways in which we've been trying to think about new ways of being and doing. So I think the core of the work is about an engagement of power, engagement with power, and in the methodological process, it's recognizing that research is not only the ambit of researchers who come from universities, that as human beings, we inherently have this ability to make sense of our reality that's innate and born within us. And this idea that only certain people can conduct research is also problematic. And it's certain people being those with degrees, those that come with a PhD, those who come from the global north. And some of the politics of research in the health space is you often find that the knowledge hierarchies and the geography of knowledge and those that are knowledge holders tend to be people in the global north, those that sit with them where the money sits, those that fund the research that happens in African countries. And they end up being the first authors in publications, they end up being the idea bearers, but they often writing about the lives and the lived realities of people in countries where they don't belong, where they don't originate from. And they writing often for audiences in the north, not for those who are living in the south. So the research process becomes complicit in re-othering communities or re-othering African bodies, women's bodies, and it doesn't really benefit the people of whom the research is meant to support. You know, so there's a lot of tensions in this space and the Africa Health Futures Project and those interested in decolonizing health in the health space are being intentional about pushing back against funders who and researchers in the global north who write about us in the global south. I think it's about making sure that we own our own narrative. And those that are being researched own their own narrative, that their ideas are count and the ideas that are written about them are not imposed upon them. So I'll give an example before I close, and then I think we can have an engagement because yeah, the one example I'd like to bring up where we're trying to think about a very real problem in a community where government is trying to, the South African government is trying to, in rural communities, implement a system of comprehensive sexualities into a community. And they actually trying to involve parents, they're trying to involve different community stakeholders and they're trying to involve young teenagers in trying to conscientize them about this comprehensive sexuality idea. But government has brought on board a manual that was written by UNESCO. And they want to use this manual to teach this community about how to do comprehensive sexuality education. Now, the community is quite upset about this because they are looking at this foreign external program, and they find that it's not really culturally appropriate. It's not actually recognizing that as a community, as a people, they have an understanding of comprehensive sexuality, and they would also like to impart their own knowledge onto their children. Another thing that this program doesn't do is it doesn't recognize that a lot of the communities in South Africa, especially in the rural areas, you would find that parents who are trying to educate their children about safe sexual practices, about family planning, about all sorts of protection against contracting HIV, they themselves have very complex histories. And when we get to the root of sexuality education or sexuality as a human right, we know that sexuality is very much a controlled it's controlled. So it's controlled through colonial processes that in South Africa stems from the labor system, the destruction of families, the destruction of agency, the imposition of religious ideas like Christianity onto people who have traditional beliefs. So these elements of health are deeply personal, and they deeply, you know, they evoke a lot of emotion, and they're not so simplistic. It's not a clear cut. It's highly evocative and entrenched in cultural, social, gender norms. So what we're trying to recognize in these situations is that to intervene, what we really need is empathy and understanding that we may have a perfectly well constructed UNESCO program, and we may have a community developed program on sexuality. But how do these two bodies of knowledge speak to each other? And how do we develop a common understanding where one is not trying to impose onto the other? And what are the ways in which we navigate that communication? So I'm going to stop there. I think I may have gone over time. Thank you.
Wow, okay. Monish, I really enjoyed that, and I didn't realize that you actually did go over time. It was very captivating and very engaging. And one thing I liked how you talked about this whole conversation about multidimensionality and decolonizing of research methods is how you said that sometimes we will need to actually look at how does decoloniality manifest itself, what exactly needs to be done. First of all, we need to kind of ask who is the face of the knowledge that we are generating. Is it possible that sometimes we, from the global south, we generate knowledge in terms of providing data, and then the face of this knowledge is quite different from the people who have actually participated in this knowledge process? And you actually also said probably we also need to think around how we can actually reclaim dignity and do research that kind of cuts across action research. We can think about how we even analyze this data in research. Let us analyze it in ways that kind of fit our context and use. And so therefore, that was really quite deep reflections there. And of course, you said health, which is your area where you are. We need our good health to be able to do anything, to even be in this session where we're talking about this process of decoloniality. So thank you very much, and we're glad to have you. And so then that makes me move to our next speaker, and that is Dr. Melissa Wangwe Mwita. Dr. Melissa, you're welcome, and please share a moment with us.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Asenat, for this opportunity to join in this discussion. I think I'm gonna try and answer the main questions that you give us with regard to decolonizing of methods. And I think the first question that was raised was what does multidimensionality mean for me as a researcher and for my work? So as a way of introduction, perhaps just to give a context for my ideas with regard to this question, my bachelor's degree was in urban and regional planning, and my master's and PhD, as earlier introduced, were in policy and planning sciences. However, the content of my research, both at master's and PhD level, is about place naming, or otherwise known as toponymy. and not just toponymy, but I focused more on a more specialized aspect of toponymy referred to as critical toponymy. And this placed me, no pun intended, in the arena of cultural and political geography. In effect, I had to change or develop my methods and approaches throughout my academic career. I did not have the luxury of remaining in one methodological approach. I had to keep evolving based on how I was developing new research interests along the way. So the question arises whenever I'm asked, what are you? Am I an urban planner? Am I a policy analyst? Or am I a geographer? Or am I all of the above? And if, for example, I identify as a geographer, does that nullify my heritage, so to speak, as an urban planner, since that was my undergraduate degree? So from my own experience, I have had to think of applying multidimensional methodological approaches as I seek to fit the various shoes I wear, so to speak. So when it comes to me being a geographer, or because that's my area of specialization, do I still fit in with the urban planners who I trained with at undergraduate level? So it becomes a point to ponder or something to consider every now and then in terms of how I present myself as a researcher and the kinds of methods that I apply in my work. The second question that was asked was for me to give two examples where at least two dimensions in research have positively or negatively affected my work. So I think one of the examples I can give has been in handling the tension that arises from some approaches being considered to be more reliable, such as presentation of facts and numbers and figures, while other approaches such as narratives, storytelling, interviews, and opinion-based information being considered to be secondary or even subjective. So as someone who has had to deal with quantitative methodologies and on the other hand, deal with qualitative methodologies, I find that this is a hurdle to overcome in order that each method, whether applied single-handedly or whether the methods are applied in a mixed format, each method should be given the credit that is due, depending on the nature and context of the research that is being considered. The other example I would give is that I have encountered challenges in my research endeavors with regard to ethical considerations. When considering the North-South divide, some of the impediments I have faced or have been faced by researchers in the Global South may not be well understood by those in the Global North. What do I mean by this? For example, a young researcher may be expected to indicate or show evidence of permission to undertake research or in order to receive the needed funding. But what the funding partners may not understand is how bureaucratic, time-consuming, and expensive the process of obtaining this research permission can be. So for the funders, and in this case, most of them coming from the Global North, this is a black and white issue. I mean, you have to obtain the research permission required. But on the ground, as we say in Kenya, things are different. There are so many hurdles and gray areas. I personally had to give up funding I qualified for because of the difficult conditions I was given by the national body responsible for research. In fact, the time that I needed to obtain the research permission was more than the time given to undertake the research. So in the end, it did not seem worth it to pursue the research, even though I had already been granted the funding. So these are some of the challenges or some of the negative effects I have faced when it comes to a clear or distinctive way that is set for how research should be done without considering some of the challenges that researchers have to face within their context. And in answering the third question, in your opinion, how would multidimensionality contribute to decolonizing research methods in the global South? To answer this, I would say, since I have been given the liberty to give my opinion on this matter, first, I would start by saying that one of the ways we can decolonize methods is by rethinking the terms that have been adopted recently, such as what we are using right now. That is the global South and the global North. Whereas I appreciate the philosophical underpinnings of these terms, I think they exacerbate the problem of creating hierarchies and creating perceived stratification between researchers coming from the two geographical regions. Secondly, and perhaps this was mentioned in the introduction, it is good to appreciate and further incorporate indigenous ideas and technologies into our methodologies. This is the onus of African researchers who, so to speak, serve as bridges between the conventional scientific methods applied in the West and the local knowledge systems which are not well articulated and as such, not adopted into the mainstream methods. So I think that African researchers have a responsibility to put into the mainstream or accepted methodologies and find a way to put our knowledge, African knowledge system or indigenous knowledge systems as acceptable or give them credibility and legitimacy as acceptable ways of doing research. And finally, on the issue of gender, there is certainly a need to consider issues of equity between the genders. Most funding opportunities are very rigid in terms of the amount of funding and the periods allocated to do the research. I think this is a kind of coloniality. As a way of decolonizing this way of doing things, we need to consider the rising number of researchers with family care responsibilities and how to accommodate these needs so that they are not left behind or so that they don't give up altogether. Thank you for your attention, and back to you, Dr. Asenath.
Wow, that's amazing, Melissa. Very nice. Perhaps I like your closing opinions that there is need to consider issues of gender and decolonize that and appreciate that, well, we are both researchers and we are not asking for like a fairer ground or something like that, but we're saying, well, please consider also the other roles that we play, which might actually be different from the rest. I like that very much. And also how you said that, you know, handling the tensions, especially between qualitative and quantitative, you know, research methods is quite a debate, even in the academia, where those who are doing quantitative will feel that they're more objective than those who are in qualitative. And so that kind of brings tensions. And I guess the answers to that is like, well, try and decolonize to the best context that you're dealing with and that which works best. So thank you very much, Melissa. And so then I'm going to invite Dr. Diana Ngui. Diana, please welcome and give us your experiences around the 3 questions that we had shared with you.
Thank you, Dr. Asenath, for the opportunity. And I want to thank the organizers for inviting me. I've noted that, let me see, my introduction does not actually indicate where I am now. Currently, I'm the research manager at the African Economic Research Consortium. And before that, I was a senior lecturer at Kenyatta University, where I was actually, where I got grounded in my research work. Having said that, I might not actually answer all the questions as they follow each other, because of course, my fellow colleagues have done quite good work on that. But I just pinpoint a few things. At the ARC, what we are concerned with is capacity building and research. And one of the things that we have noted is that, as the just previous presenter has said, is that as much as all these calls for research are, they're encouraging women to apply, you find quite a number cannot apply. So probably with this, I would, it's something we may want to decolonize, but are we practically, doing it at the ground? So one of the things we have noted is that the women researchers are left behind so much, and it could be, as somebody has said, because of the care work that we do as women, and we don't have time, to advance in most of these things that our fellow men do. So one of the things we have decided is to pick up our fellow women and tried to organize trainings for them, specifically for them. And once we organize the trainings, we also attach them to mentors. And the reason for this is we have realized that whenever we make a call, they don't even apply, even the continuous call within our pipeline, which we do continuously. You can apply anytime somebody wants, they rarely apply. So we are training them and attaching them to mentors so that at the end of the day, they will be able to write papers that are, of course, of quality, and they get into the pipeline of research. So through that, we have found that we are going to bring on board more ladies, and even, create confidence in them that they can still do it, regardless. And within ARC, it has a lot of networks. So when we're attaching them to a mentor, we're also exposing them to the network, because one of the things probably I would talk from experience is that we realize that depending on the universities we attend, that is one way of thinking, we find that the networking could be very low. So what we do is that, for example, being an economist, you find that there are those cartels of economists in different places. So when we bring these people on board, we expose them to this, recognized researchers, and from there you see that they are able to get wings to fly. Even probably on their own, they are able to apply for some of the funding, and they get. And the other thing that we have tried to do apart from the capacity building is when we call for research, some of the components require that we have ladies within those, researchers. So we ensure that that in whatever application we have, we emphasize on the ladies in those, to be in the list of applicants. So as a seasoned researcher and somebody is a man, sometimes in your group you must have a lady, and that's one way of bringing them on board, because we realize that they have been left so much behind and we need to pull them up even as we proceed. I would also talk about my experience when it comes to the methodology. Of course, being an economist, we are more or less leaning towards quantitative other than the qualitative. But one of the things I've realized, even as we continue with research, is that the quantitative actually should be taking not much of the space and should not be so much glorified than the qualitative. And again, it will depend on where people are coming from. Because even before you do the qualitative research, the qualitative should be in a position to give you a story so that you're able just to do that quantitative part. And that's why in some of the research arenas we are in, we talk about econometrics of the quantitative research coming in the evening, meaning that you have to be able to write the research very well, you know, explain to the people seated there what is your problem. All this is a narrative. And are you able to tell us what are your objectives? Are you able to add to knowledge? What is originality? And what is the, apart from originality, what is the value addition? When that one is set clear, then the quantitative comes in the evening. That's what we normally say. So it's very good, even as we decolonize this, we get out of your minds the thought of quantitative, you know, will give us more information than the qualitative. Actually, the qualitative more or less gives us very good information. So when it comes to the disadvantages at my area of work, it is the area of specialization. Of course, most of the times we say that we are not, you know, we don't have, you know, we don't know everything. So you have an area of specialization. So the only hurdle when it comes to my personal research, you find that a funder is calling for these research that has multiple, you know, multiple people, social aspects. So we need to look for people from different countries, from different disciplines. And you find that people have already created their own cocoons or their own, you know, cartels of working together. Yet the younger and junior researcher here cannot be able to penetrate into that cartel. Then what do we do practically? One of the ways is like what we are doing here in ARIN. We call, you know, we are calling for these workshops. It is giving exposure even to the young researchers. The other way is what we are doing at ARC, training them and giving them exposure and ensuring that they work hand in hand with the senior researchers so that they are not blocked out. We can't wait till these senior researchers exit, you know, the stage so that we can come in. We need also to have these junior researchers on board so that all of us can work together. So let me stop there at the moment and probably get it back to you, Asena. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, Diana, thank you very much for those insights. And I like the part where you talk about mentorship. And I know this is something that Dr. John Sartella is very passionate about. Of course, he's going to talk to us at the end of this, that we don't just, you know, it doesn't just end here, but we also think about succession and how we can even mentor, and also the issues that you've talked about on gender. Thank you very much. And so I'm going to call out on Moreno, Adriana Moreno. I know you got lots of experience on this. If you could just 2 minutes or so, and then we'll go to the question and answer session. Adriana.
Yeah, thank you, Joel, and for the invitation and to share some of my experience on this topic. I would like to start saying that, okay, I really share the ideas of Joel at the beginning about this difficulty of the multidimensionality, but we don't have only, well, he also mentioned is gender difficulties, well, differences, but also the disciplines, the level of impact, but also when we have these different knowledge systems that we need to bring in sometimes in researchers or some research that we do. This is my case. I have been working the last 4 years with indigenous people in Bolivia, and there we face all of challenges. It's not only how we put together different disciplines, because I've been working with the people from agronomy, and I'm myself working on educational science. And in the team, we have a very diverse team from political science, communication, economy. So it is very complex way of understanding the territorial planning, because this is our topic. We wanted to study a new law and how we can implement this new law in Bolivia. So we started with the idea of okay, the best views will be better to have this new way of understanding the territories. But what I would like to stress today about this decolonizing methods, and not only decolonizing method, but decolonizing ourselves in the process of a multidimensional research process is very demanding. We must to pay attention to so many different things, and I will say that we must start thinking of doing things completely different than what has been done until now. If we have in our process is also a north-south cooperation. I'm working from I'm from Colombia, but working in Belgium, and they have been in Bolivia. This has been also another of the issues. And then working with the communities, and then there are so many things that we need to put together, and we said, okay, this is not possible if we just stick to the normal way of doing research, and sticking of if we apply qualitative and qualitative research. This is not the point. The point that we wanted to start our research was for what we need this knowledge. And the knowledge, what we wanted to gain, is to transform the realities of the local communities. And there, I think it is all what is about at the end, is why we are there in this context doing this research. It is what is the interest, and how we match our interest with the interest of the people, and how really we are trying to convey all those interests together, but to transform the realities that we want to transform. And then I realized that it is very important, as well already so many researchers are pointing it. We cannot transform the reality if we don't know the history, the past, the history of the context. The past history will inform what are the power the relations, the power relations that are based in the present, and then from the past to the present, we can build together the future. But we need really to know all the things that have been happening through many years, even from the colonial times, because this is something that could really modificate or in a way will help to understand how we can deal with the different issues that are there, and how we can propose a new futures. But on the other hand, it is as already Melissa mentioned it, we need to break down with this idea of North and South. But how we can break it? From my experience, one important thing is that we, as researchers from the South, we need to start to value the research that has been done in the South. And then we need to start looking at the bibliography. We know that this is a business of the peer review journals, that most of the literature that is there is in English, and there are so many interesting studies that are not in English language, that could be even in local languages, but will give us much better understanding what is happening locally. But we are not citing and going to look for those research that has been done in local languages, because it is not very well, because they say, okay, it is not peer review and so on. But I think it's important that to decolonize the process of our research process and the methodologies, we need also in looking at different bibliography, different references, and start to valorizing different knowledge. And this is the other point of trying to bring in different knowledge. If we really want to work with the communities, with indigenous knowledge and with the indigenous communities, we need to value experienced knowledge. That is not the case until now. And we are trying also to base on this rationality of thinking, and then diminish a lot what is happening with the feelings and senses. And I think we need to go more towards that, to try to break these differences between the different knowledge systems. And to close, well, I would say that we need to try also to look at the problem from different levels, because yeah, as already Joel mentioned it, yes, it's true that when we work at the micro level, it is less difficult. The tensions are a little bit less and more manageable in the multidimensionality. But if we go toward the meso and to the macro level, this will be growing on. But if we try to understand and try to work from the micro level and inform the meso and the macro level, this could help us. This is also in our case, working with the different within the team. We have a very junior bachelor students and master degree and PhD and professors, and we tried really to work together in the community as we were all the same. And I think that this is a way to break with this power relation between the kind of levels of researcher, that we go towards the community together, and in the community will be all of them the same, but learning from each other, because everyone could bring something. And for instance, I'm not very good on the local language, but the bachelor students were really managing the local language, so they really could help us in getting with the communities. And then all these interactions between the team could help us to break this power relation. Well, these are some of the thoughts that I would like to share. Maybe, well, you have other questions, but I think to close, will be very important to pay attention to history, but no to hegemonic history, but other histories, the histories from the indigenous and from women, and from other perspectives, and also, well, to paying attention of our own knowledge. I think this is important, and we could learn a lot from the people from the South. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Adriana, for those wonderful perspectives. And well, I think I agree with you when you say we need collaborations. We also need to understand and appreciate the history of decoloniality. So then that will be the only way we can be able to challenge the power narrative that there exists. Then we can be able to agree on the future forward. And so I guess this brings us to the end of all our speakers. And I would like to take this opportunity to open up for Q&A session, and in this session I'm going to ask all the participants who've been with us since we started at 2:30 to feel free to kind of present your own perspectives of multidimensionality of sustainability. And then of course you could also ask questions and, you know, whatever perspectives you gained from this experience. So I'm going to check by the bar and see if we have any questions. But as I do that, all of you are free, participants, to just raise up your hand and ask or participate in any way. Joe, I don't know if we have any questions on the chat.
Not directly, but we do have some chunks of information and sort of reflections from Frank. I don't know if Frank, if you want to express your reflections here.
Yeah, Frank Naidu.
Thank you very much for that. I was just trying to unmute. I think what was quite interesting was the reiteration from the three speakers on women being left behind. Quite honestly, I've not really seen that in the workplace, but then again, I've probably operated in different areas. And I think what was quite interesting is the way the examples that were given, that are faced particularly by African women in their various contexts. So that points towards an action point. And what I suggested in the chat was that, you know, we should convene a workshop focusing on that problem. And I think the way one can do that in a structured way is to devise a questionnaire to gather the data of the key issues that can be addressed, find the appropriate experts, like the four people that have spoken already, to talk specifically to those problems, and then conclusively come up with a paper that can serve as a guideline to address these problems from the inception of calls right through to the time impediments that women have as caregivers, as mothers, and wearing more hats than a normal male researcher would have. So I think that is a very good point. And the aim of these sort of conversations and the decolonization is really moving into implementation to see how do we actually address these problems of decolonization. What I liked as well from the last speaker was talking about breaking down the barriers between the North and South. And sharing the example in South America is amazing. I think that's quite good. What we need to look at is not only look at it from an Africa perspective, which we tend to do, but also to look at it from a BRICS perspective as well as a South American perspective as well. So I think I'll just leave those comments there, and we can probably take feedback from the rest of the team. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank. Those are very frank statements from you, and I guess we can pick on how we can actually start talking about gender and decoloniality. And I guess, Joanne, that is something that you can actually, you know, stage up and do it. And so then I see Luret La.
Hi, Asna. I had a question.
Yes, Nora, please go ahead.
I cannot see the hand raise function. Yeah, but I just want to thank all, you know, the participants and of course the presenters for, I mean, quite stimulating ideas. So I just thought of a reflection. It could be a comment or a question, or perhaps an area to think about when you are talking about the, you know, decolonizing research, decolonizing methodologies. But of course, there's a school of thought, and there this new school of thought around, you know, if we talk about decolonization, it should be about going, you know, beyond the critique of the current epistemology, or even, you know, decolonizing knowledge and methodologies. Because the argument is that when you look at colonization, it was all about land. It was all about, you know, colonial property. And some authors have actually called for, dismantling or doing some more of restoration, or, taking back actually what has been taken away due to, injustices. So just a reflection around how we begin to dismantle the things that have been, taken, probably due to injustices. I think the issues of gender have been spoken here, and so on and so forth. So for me, it's a reflection. Even when you talk about methods, we need to see what is it that existed, or what is it that we need to dismantle. Because once we dismantle that, then I think, we become progressive. So it's about taking back, it's about restoration. So it would be good to reflect, even as we look at all these, methods, knowledge, critiquing current epistemology, that we also reflect and say, there's the way the system has been working, and that also need to be dismantled, so that we are also progressive, or in other words, talk about transformation, that big idea. So from where I sit, it would be good to engage with that kind of discussion and debate, so that all that has been taken is able to be restored, and of course move towards sustainability. That will be my reflection. Thanks, Asina. Back to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Nora, for those wonderful perspectives. Truly appreciated. So I'm going to also call out on Lurette La, who is a medical doctor. I guess, well, you could give us your perspectives from Nigeria.
Okay, hello everybody, and I'm really glad to be at this webinar today. I have actually been working on a multi-continent now. We're looking at calling down time on neglected tropical diseases. And from my own experience, when we initially started, this was a DFID funded project, and we had partners from the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, and it's being implemented in Nigeria by Sightsavers, NGO. Now, when we started as younger researchers from what we now term the Global South, it was more of, okay, let's wait for these people to tell us what to do. But we realized that they are there and we are here. We know the context. We know the technicalities around overcoming implementation research in our own context. So as we grew in the research relationship, we got to a point where we were bold enough to say, look, this is how we think we should do this, because we are familiar with the context. Because initially, when you're trying to form a team, the forming, the norming, etc., all the processes. So I felt I should also share that experience. But now it's more of, okay, we are taking charge. We actually are beginning to have the narratives in our hands as the project is winding up in August. And I don't know, a lot has been mentioned, but I don't know what we all think about the issues around financial trust, especially with our donors from the global north. How do we overcome that? I know that there's no one-size-fits-all answer, but I'm just beginning to think we should think out of the box, try to get internal fundings, because I usually have this feeling that we are just not trusted with funds. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and I'm glad to be here.
Well, thank you very much, La, for those perspectives. Yeah, financial trust and financial issues. Perhaps it's time we also did bits of decoloniality when it comes to funding, so that you can start looking at internal funding. And I know this is one of those areas that Dr. John Satella is very passionate about, because we have situations whereby projects are funded, and then at the end of the period, when the funding stops, then the project dies. So is it possible that we can actually have reflections on how we can go past the period of the project and kind of try to design ways to go about this? So probably, yes, it's time for internal thinking around internal funding. And so I don't know if we have any other comments from the participants, because if we do not have, Then I'm going to invite Dr. John Satella to talk to us. Dr. John Satella is the convener for Africa Research and Impact Network, and is going to give us some key learnings from this session that you've had, and also give us some, way forward. So, Dr. Jones, you're welcome.
Thank you, Asmat. I think from my side, there is really nothing to stress. I think the speakers have been very, very clear. I mean, I've never had such a level of clarity, especially in a very complex topic like multidimensionality of methods, decoloniality of methods, and really with practical examples. So I would just say that this was really very useful. And I think these kinds of experiences are really necessary to be shared every time, in a much more sustainable way. I just want to add two things. Number one is the fact that we all do appreciate that multidimensionality of methods is very critical. Not least because we just want to be, interdisciplinary researchers, but because the societal challenges that we face today are not basically a one-off or a disciplinary kind of thing. You cannot tackle them or sort of handle them. They are multiples. They are complex. They are different. They are merging in different ways. I like one example which was given, that if you look at health system, if you want to be healthy, there are many things that come into that particular being healthy. And I would use the same example. If you want to eat ugali, there are many things that go into that eating ugali. Of course, you need to have water. Of course, there's the water elements there. You need to have the flour that you use to cook the ugali. Of course, that brings in the agriculture perspective. You need to have firewood, which is again bringing in the energy, perspective. And you need to have people who are healthy and able to eat that ugali. So that element shows you that even the issues we see as really very clear really requires a lot of multidimensional thinking. And because the society has been constructed in very territorial ways, and some of these territorial elements have been highlighted, things like north, south, you're from the south, you're from the north, you're not trusted, you are more trusted, you know how to do or have better methodologies, you don't have better methodologies. So those territories have actually meant that a lot of our approaches to addressing the challenges that we have been actually very narrow. So this particular discussion, to me, has opened our eyes to be able to see these things in a much more open way. And just to add one last thing before I conclude, one other thing that I've learned, that really coloniality can be institutionalized, that there's a lot of institutionalization of coloniality. And in this, I want just to quote what Melissa said. I had to forgo funding, that I qualified for, because it wasn't fitting with the conditions, and the institutional arrangements actually meant that the research time or the time spent to get a permit to do the research was actually more than the research, the time that somebody, she required to do the research itself. That is a big bomb to us, my friends. And I really subscribe to that particular plea, that really our institutional issues, our governance perspective for research, how good are they to be able to help promote multidimensionality, and also to help catalyze and enable really work to be done in a way that sort of tackles the multiple societal challenges. And that makes me think quite broadly that we need, and this has also been quite stressed, that we need to engage. We really need to engage, because if we don't speak about these things, no one will know about them. I'm just realizing that the time to get a permit can be more than the time that you need to implement a particular research. I mean, that is something that most people don't know. And how do we do this? How do we ensure that these things are profiled? It is the things that Frank is talking about, that we need, forums to be able to strengthen and profile these particular voices. I look at a situation whereby, for instance, as young scholars within the continent, as we try to establish research leadership in the continent, can we be able to convene sessions even with donors and be able to express these particular experiences? Because I think it can change a lot. And because we have been disjointed in Africa in terms of the way we pursue research. So a lot of our voices are subdued. A lot of our voices are not properly profiled into this particular realm of decision-making space. So as one speaker said, we need to engage with the power, the spaces of power. These are the donors, these are the government, the national funding agencies. We need to engage with them and discuss these particular concerns with them. And for that very reason, we will be trying to really try to organize sessions where we can basically bring these voices to be able to talk, especially I'm looking at the donor world. The next thing we could be looking at is to mobilize donors in Africa and be able to bring them to listen to the voices of young African researchers, including young intellectual women and men and all that, so that these concerns are addressed. Finally, Joel, would just request that some of the points that have been raised are very powerful, and I would really want to see this captured. I don't know what the speakers feel, but I would suggest that you could share or sort of frame those particular points and share with us in form of blogs, which then we can be able to profile and put online and share widely. And some of those experiences, please put them in there, and we can take this forward, even as we look forward to additional discussions. Otherwise, thank you very much. And it was great to listen to all the thought-provoking interventions. Asante sana.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Jones, for those wonderful closing remarks. And so I guess I take it back to Dr. Joel Onyango, who set the agenda for today. So please, Joe, back to you.
Thanks everybody. I really appreciate the time you've taken and for staying all through the 2-hour period. This conversation doesn't end here. We have already had 5 conversations on different perspectives. As I'd mentioned earlier, we have one more of these conversations in the seminar series to have next month, and we'll be sharing further information about this, and this will focus on articulation of methods. But even so, we still have a summer school coming up, and this would be an opportunity to build capacity on how we can challenge, how do we make it practical, some of the things that we've been talking about in the praxis sort of nexus in this. We are developing a book volume, and this will also be launched soon. So I really appreciate the time you've taken to be part of this conversation. We invite you to join our fellowships, ARIN fellowships, but also you can continue participating in different seminars that you're convening, and we'll be sharing with you this in more detail. I think nothing else to add here. I'll just say thank you for being here, and wish everybody a great afternoon, a great evening, a great morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.